Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? Is the mic okay? All right. Better? All right. Good afternoon, and welcome to our Friends of Boatwright Memorial Library 2010 Peple Lecture. I'm Linda Ventura. I haven't forgotten who I am yet. I'm Linda Ventura, president of the Friends of Boatwright Memorial Library. Each year, we honor Dr. Edward C. Peple and his wife, Mary, by naming our annual lecture, our Peple Lecture, of him, featuring nationally recognized scholars. A 1932 alumnus, Dr. Peple 1932 graduate from the Peple from the University of Richmond, got his master's and his bachelor's degree from Harvard University. Dr. Peple served on the university faculty from 1937 until 1965. When he became the dean of the graduate school and then the associate provost. He was actively involved in the formation of the Friends of Boatwright Memorial Library. We would especially like to welcome family members of the Peple family members who are with us today. Dr. Edward C. Peple Jr. and his wife, Sharon, are with us today somewhere. There they are. They would stand. Ned, as we all know him, is a past president of the Friends of Boatwright Memorial Library. And he stood in this spot on many occasions. Their son, Stephen, is in the back. And I'm sorry that his brother Stephen, well, his son is with him as well. Dr. Peple's son Stephen and his wife Ireland. Their son and his fiancée is in the back as well. And we are so happy to have them all. The Friends the Friends' next event I would like to tell you about. The Friends' next event is the annual meeting at the end of the year, and it will be on Tuesday, April 27th at 7 p.m. in Keller Hall Reception Room. Earl Dunford, alumnus, past president of the Friends of Boatwright Memorial Library, and co-author of the book Miller and Rhodes, Under the Clock, a story of Miller and Rhodes, will be our speaker for that event. It is the mission of the Friends of Boatwright Memorial Library to support the library through the gifts of various materials or equipment needed by the library. We also present receptions, exhibits, trips, and lectures for the enjoyment and the enlightenment of our members and our friends. The Friends encourage gifts and bequests of books, manuscripts, monies, and other materials to the library. We would welcome your interest in becoming a friend. There are a number of Friends Executive Council members who will be in the back afterward if you have any questions or interest in becoming a friend. There's also a sign-up sheet in case you would like to hear about our upcoming events. Please remember, be a friend and invite a friend to be a friend. And now I'd like to proceed with today's event. I would like to introduce Dr. Daniel Palazzolo. Dr. Palazzolo is the chair of the Political Science Department here at the University of Richmond. He earned his bachelor's degree from Trinity College, his master's at the University of Houston, and his doctorate here at the University of Virginia. He is a distinguished author, speaker, and often provides political analysis in media around the country. Dr. Palazzola will introduce our speaker for today. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Linda. It's a real pleasure to be here today and to introduce to you Dr. Larry Sabato, who's seated up here to my right. Dr. Sabato is university professor and Robert Kent Gooch Professor of Politics at the University of Virginia. And he got his undergraduate degree at the University of Virginia, went on to get his PhD at Oxford, where he was a Rhodes Scholar. And in that respect, he's sort of like Dr. Peple. You know, he sort of went to an undergraduate school and went off and got his PhD and came back to his undergraduate college. However, I'm almost certain that Dr. Sabato has never even thought about, much less accepted, a position as dean or as associate provost. As a matter of fact, in his long tenure at the University of Virginia, he's even escaped the necessary evil of having to be appointed department chair, which is a great source of admiration for me at the moment. So, many of you, I guess I should say, it's a good thing that he decided not to take that administrative path, because many of you know Dr. Sabato as probably one of the leading political analysts in the country. In fact, if you look at the capacity of political analysts to predict the outcomes of elections, whether it be who's going to win the presidential election, by what margin, the number of electoral college votes, the number of seats that one party is going to win in the House or Senate, Dr. Sabato, through the powerful engine of his Center for Politics at the University of Virginia, has been more accurate than the rest of them. And as a political scientist, I find that to be quite astonishing. You can't be right all the time, but it's awfully nice to be right most of the time, and he certainly has earned that distinction. So today, we have an outstanding teacher, an outstanding scholar, one of the nation's finest political analysts, but also a friend. And I would like to just take just a little bit of a personal privilege here to talk about a side of Dr. Sabato you might not know. I can see he's getting nervous. Back in the day at University of Virginia, I was one of his many teaching assistants. And Dr. Sabato would have this Introduction to American Government course, and he'd have 4 or 5 teaching assistants, and I was one of them. And it was an astonishing class. He used to, I think the theme of the class was politics is a good thing, and I think that remains the theme of the Center for Politics. And if a student answered a question correctly, you're talking about 400 or 500 students now, he would give them a sticker that said politics is a good thing. And I see he's continued the practice of having a student drive him to Richmond, because occasionally, literally at the beginning of class, he would announce, "I'm going to Richmond tonight. Would anybody like to drive me?" And of course, the students would all line up. It was quite amazing. But the thing that I remember most, and I have many, many stories, the thing I remember most is the fact that I was applying for jobs. I was kind of finishing my PhD dissertation, and Larry had heard that I was looking around, so he called me up one day and he said, "Dan, yeah, this is Larry Sabato." "Oh, hello, Mr. Sabato." Mr., with the emphasis on Mr. For those of you who've been at UVA, you don't call your professor or doctor, you call him Mr. He said, "I understand that you're thinking about going on the job market." I said, "Yeah, I sure am." He goes, "Well, I'd like to write a letter for you." I said, "Well, that sounds terrific. I really appreciate that." So the next day, lo and behold, he calls back and says, "Dan, about that letter, it's in your portfolio. Good luck." I said, "Oh, thanks very much." And the point of telling you that story is that we all know Larry as a nationally known political analyst, but the truth of the matter is he's a very good friend. He's got a warm heart. He's very generous to people that he's met, many of his students over the years, including his own school where he went to elementary school in Norfolk. He's just a very generous soul. And so I hope you'll join me in welcoming him to the stage, Dr. Larry Sabato.
And Dan, here's that sticker. See? You can have it. That's a big one for you. It's in UVA colors. Now I wore your colors today. See, there you go. I thought. tell you the truth, I like this outfit because I try to wear both red and blue, since they represent the two parties. And I have learned, I'm quite serious about this, when you go on television, you only wear blue, you get emails from Republicans saying, I always knew you were a Democrat. That is so obvious. It's propaganda. And then when you go on, you wear red, you get emails from Democrats saying, I always knew you were a Republican. That propaganda you give for the GOP. So I try to wear something that has red and blue in it. Not that it helps. This morning I went to, I had scheduled some TV time. I hate doing Sundays, but because the C team is generally operating the equipment. And sure enough, I went. I ruined my Sunday morning. I'm sitting there in front of the camera forever while they're trying to get things adjusted, this, that, and the other. And finally, I pop up on there, and they ask me the questions that we had talked about in advance. And they can see me but not hear me. And so then I had to sit there for another half hour while they tried to fiddle with it. Then I popped back up, same thing happened. So I left after an hour, just having appeared but never having said a word. I got home, I looked at my email, and somebody had written me, this is the first time I've ever agreed with you. So I've learned now how to do these TV things. Look, Dan was not just a TA. He was my head TA for this American politics course, which we enjoyed greatly, and he was terrific. The reason I volunteered to write his letter, I wanted to make sure that this outstanding teacher got to a place that valued good teaching, and I hope that you are as proud of him as I am. I've heard so many good things from his students over the years, and he is truly an outstanding teacher. He cares about the teaching, he cares about the connections with individual students, and why bother being a professor if you don't like to teach? I've never understood that. You could just go off and work at Brookings or AEI or one of these organizations that does research if you don't like to teach. So Dan is a terrific teacher, and I hope he is valued for that, as he should be here at UR. Well, look, we're going to talk about politics. Let's have a conversation about it. I'm going to open up for questions and brickbats or whatever it is you want to throw at me. Toward the end, I'll try to save 15 minutes at least for questions, if not a little bit more than that, because I find that people who will come out to a lecture on a Sunday afternoon generally have strong opinions. That's just been my experience, because otherwise you would be home enjoying the Olympics or whatever the heck. It's actually a nice day. It's not snowing. And we've hit the 55-inch mark in Charlottesville, heading toward 60, and I hope we never have a winter like this. Can't take too much more global warming, I'll tell you that much, based on what I've seen this year. But let's talk a little about where we are in politics, because unfortunately, we're not in a very good place. Now, partly it's because of the economy. Whenever the economy's bad, people are in a sour mood. They're in an angry mood. They're dissatisfied with whoever's in power and whatever they're doing, and understandably so. And clearly, we've got 13, 14, 15 million unemployed, and actually millions more who are drastically, dramatically underemployed, 16, 17% unemployed plus underemployed rate, which is just awful. I mean, that's really terrible. While we're nowhere near where we were in the Great Depression, where we came close to a 24, 25% unemployment rate, we actually have about the same number of unemployed people as we did during the Great Depression. And it's important to focus on that, because it's not just the people who are unemployed, it's their family members and their friends and the people who live down the street. And everybody thinks, my God, it could happen to me, or, there but for the grace of God go I. And it really affects the temperament of a society. And it's not just the economy. I think it's also this kind of recession, which is clearly deeper and longer lasting than others that we've had, certainly since World War II. There have been so many indicators of this. We see it in Virginia. You see it in every almost every state across the country. There are a few exceptions, that are exceptions that have mainly natural mineral resources to enable them to survive and prosper even in tough times. But by and large, most of the states are in this situation. And this is going to be a long recovery. I think it's going to be much longer than most people really understand. And of course, all that's going to have political impacts as well. My major point, I'm going to stress this as I move through the years because I try to do things chronologically so people can follow. Politics is cyclical. It's just like economics. The economic cycle is a part of our history. It will always be, I think, part of our history, any country's history, the world's history. Life is cyclical, and politics is cyclical. And so in a system that is essentially two-party, and some of you may be independents, and some of you may be libertarians, and some of you may be Ron Paulites, and goodness knows I know not to offend the Paulites, because you talk about having a computer burn out on you. Or the Palinites. Between the Paulites and the Palinites, something about those P, the letter P in politics. So I try to be balanced on these things, but clearly you've got essentially two-party system. We've had a two-party system. Every now and then you have a third party come to the fore, and they do reasonably well for a cycle, and they fade away because our system is built to support two parties. The laws are built to support two parties. The campaign finance system is built to support two parties, and all the rest of it. So we have this alternating system, which I think can be summarized this way. With great frequency, we throw the bums out, and we throw a new set of bums in. And then we get really sick of the new bums, and then we throw them out, and we get the old bums back. Maybe there are new people elected to represent the old bums, but still, we go back and forth. We're never fully satisfied. We never will be, because the American public, probably like publics across the world, believe that government can do things that it can't. People believe that presidents can do things they can't. People actually believe that the President of the United States runs a $14 trillion national economy. People actually believe that a President of the United States sits in the Oval Office pulling levers and pushing buttons, running a $14 trillion national economy. It is to laugh. Thank goodness they can't. Things would be even more screwed up, if they could. One person cannot run a $14 trillion economy. But the whole thing it's absurd. Presidents don't do that. Honestly, would we ever have a recession if presidents could control the economy? None of them like to be unpopular. Well, maybe Nixon. But other than Nixon, he was a strange psychology. But, other than Nixon, nobody likes to be unpopular. And so, they can't run it. They can't control it. And government affects the margins. Even this stimulus bill, close to $800 billion. It sounds like a lot, except it's dribbled out over 3 or 4 years, and you're talking about 2 or 3% of the gross national product, and come on, it affects the margins of the economy. But we, the people, have come to believe, for a combination of reasons, that government should produce change, should control these things. We believe it, and so we expect solutions to maybe insoluble problems, and we want them on a reasonable timetable. So we're destined to be disappointed, is what we really get down to. And especially when someone like Barack Obama comes in with those tremendously high expectations. He was going to solve all problems. He was walking on water. And of course, a year later, the headline is, Obama can't swim. It's the same picture. He's walking on the edge of the water. He's walking onto the water, but he can't swim now. And originally, he was walking on water. So these high expectations really accompany every new president. That's why we have a honeymoon. It even worked for George W. Bush, who lost the popular vote. He still had a substantial honeymoon. And you think back again, cyclically. In 2000, we had a tie for all practical purposes. We were tied in the presidential race. We were tied in the Senate. It was a 50-50 Senate. We had a Republican majority of 3 in the House of Representatives. That was as close to a tie vote as you're ever going to get in national politics. After 9/11, the Republicans gained quite a bit of steam, and they did very well in the 2002 midterm elections. Usually presidents do badly in midterm elections, and we'll talk about what's coming up in November a little later in the lecture. But in 2002, the Republicans were so high that Bush and the Republicans actually gained seats in the Senate and the House and in some of the key governorships around the country. 2004, you didn't have an overwhelming Bush reelection. It was the closest reelection for an incumbent president in the Electoral College that we had had in modern times. And there are many reasons for that, including polarization, but by and large, 2004 was a Republican year. They gained seats in the Senate, and they gained more seats in the House, and Bush won a comfortable but not overwhelming reelection. So you had a tie, followed by a Republican year, followed by another Republican year, and then came 2006. After 6 years of Bush, and this is traditional in American politics, the cycle reasserted itself again. The cycle is the 6th year itch. You have 6 years of a presidential administration, and those intractable problems build up. People become dissatisfied because the problems haven't been solved or additional problems have been created, a la Iraq. Boom. Democratic majorities in both houses of Congress, additional Democrats in a lot of the key governorships. So 2006, big Democratic year. We threw the bums out, we threw the new bums in. 2008, the tide is still building. Bush was becoming ever more unpopular. You know, if it wasn't Katrina, it was Iraq. If it wasn't Iraq, it was the collapsing economy. 2008, one of the biggest Democratic years ever. People are always surprised to hear that Obama got the largest percentage of the vote in a presidential race for a Democrat since the Civil War, with the exception only of Roosevelt and Lyndon Johnson. All those other Democrats who won, like Wilson for 2 terms, they were minority presidents, or they got a bare majority, like Jimmy Carter with 50.2%. Obama got 52.9%, nearly 53% of the vote. For a Democrat, that is a very sizable majority. Republicans tend to do better in re-elections. You know, they get 58% and 60% and so on. Johnson did well, but that wasn't a re-election. Anyway, so we're up to Obama, those extremely high expectations, coming in with that near economic collapse for reasons that we can talk about later. There are plenty of people to blame, and we like to have lots of people to blame. We have lots of people to blame, so it's very useful. You know, the first thing he does, he gets the stimulus plan passed. I think it was oversold. You know, they always oversell in order to get something passed. And people were expecting miracles, and there were no miracles. There weren't going to be any miracles. But that was passed, and then they went right to health care, thinking that it could be done in 6 months. That was their original thinking. And it could have been done in 6 months if Barack Obama had been the reincarnation of Lyndon Johnson. Because Lyndon Johnson was a rude, coarse, mean, vicious human being who knew how to get things done. Often that's the sort. You know, in the presidency, regardless whether it's Democrat or Republican, they know how to get things done. They can hit heads together. They can come, let us reason together, as Johnson used to say. There was no reason involved as he hulked over you with that giant body of his, threatening you in various and sundry ways. Lyndon Johnson would have gotten that done in 6 months, but Barack Obama made a fundamental mistake. The fundamental mistake was he looked at the tallies in the House and the Senate, and he said, I got this made. This is iced. We got 60 Democrats. We can shut off a Republican filibuster. I've got a big, strong honeymoon, big, strong mandate. I'm going to hold those Democrats together. We can certainly win Olympia Snowe and maybe Susan Collins. Got a couple spare votes if I need them. In the House, I got a 40-seat margin. It's one of the best margins in modern times. I can't lose. So I'm not going to bang heads together. I'm going to reason with these people. We're going to give them this and give them that, and work this out and work that out. And we're going to get it passed and be happy as we're doing it. And of course, it never works that way. And there are going to be books written about how health care was blown. I mean, they could have gotten it done. But they gave Max Baucus 3.5 weeks to do nothing. Senate Finance Committee, you remember that during the summer, how he wasted 3.5 weeks doing nothing? I guess he was spending time with the mistress. That was probably what was going on there. I assume you read about that. But anyway, that's not a revelation. If anybody is from the press here, don't attribute that to me. That's been in the New York Times and so on and so forth. But it wasn't just him. You had Obama was so determined not to be Bill Clinton. And we remember what Bill and Hillary Clinton did in the early 90s. They had their own plan that they put together, and they said, this is the way it's going to be. We don't want an I dotted differently than we have it, or a T crossed differently than we have it in this bill. You're going to take this and you're going to pass it, Democratic Congress. And by the way, Clinton had almost exactly the same majority in both the House and the Senate that Barack Obama had. Different kind of Democratic Party back then, more conservative Democrats than you have today. And so that's the way they did it. And of course, Congress wasn't willing to go along, in part because Bill Clinton had only gotten 43% of the vote. And that he had been, almost all the members of the Senate and House who'd been elected in 1992 greatly exceeded his percentage in their state and district. They didn't think they owed Clinton anything. But Obama got in and said, well, that's not the way to do it. Instead of telling Congress it's got to be done this way, I'm just going to set out some general principles, and I'm going to let them decide how to meet those principles. And so you had literally 11 congressional barons in the House and the Senate all designing their own health care plan. And so every week or every few days you'd have another plan in the headlines. We're going to raise this tax, and we're going to do this, and we're going to have this fee, and we're going to structure it this way, and we're going to have this kind of public option. No, we're going to have this kind of public co-op. Well, number one, it thoroughly confused the public. Number two, when you come up with that many new taxes, new fees, new arrangements, you frighten people, and then you frighten a whole bunch of additional people because you've come up with 11 versions of it, at least 10 of which will never happen. So why frighten people if it's never going to happen to begin with? And then it dragged on and it dragged on, and people got their egos involved, and they started insisting on their way or the highway, and the rest is history. Just the other day, and I can't give his name, but a senator not from the state said to me, well, the guy I blame is Bob Menendez, the governor or the senator from New Jersey, who is the head of the Democratic Senatorial Committee. I said, why is it Bob Menendez's fault? And he says it's Bob Menendez's fault because if he had given us the slightest indication we were going to lose the seat in Massachusetts, we would have worked over Christmas instead of taking 12 days off. I said, well, I mean, it's just amazing to me that you didn't have an idea that eventually 60 was going to disappear. Frank Lautenberg, and God bless him and hope he totally recovers, but he's just been diagnosed with cancer, 85-year-old U.S. Senator from New Jersey, and Senator Robert Byrd, 92, can barely get into the Senate anymore. And, God retires some of these people from time to time unexpectedly. You can't count on 60 votes. And so you make the best of what you got when you have it, and you push hard. And instead, they made the House take that vote on cap and trade, which is so controversial, and a lot of members are going to lose for that. The Democratic members who voted for cap and trade will lose on that vote alone in some of these districts come November. For what? It had no chance of passing the Senate. I just find it amazing that it was poorly thought out, poorly developed, poorly executed, and now you have a president who has essentially lost the honeymoon, has still a chance to get some pieces of health care through, but at great cost, a bloody reconciliation battle that will infuriate the minority party and will lose 5 or 6 Democratic senators minimum on the way to getting the 50 votes plus Biden breaking the tie if they decide to use reconciliation. So I think it's heads they lose, tails they lose in terms of November. Heads they lose, tails they lose, because whether they pass it or not, whether they make the left mad by not passing it or make the right mad by passing it, they're going to lose a lot of seats in November. We'll get to that in a moment. So, I'm not trying to ignore all the positive things. There was the Nobel Peace Prize, for President Obama, and followed by the Pulitzer Prize for his as yet unwritten memoirs. And that actually hurt him, by the way, and they admit that in the White House. They didn't apply for it. They had no clue he was going to get it, and it hurt him because it was ridiculous, and almost everybody had that reaction. I mean, it's premature. I could easily see him getting it in 20 years. That's a career capper to get the Nobel Peace Prize. You don't get it being nominated 2 weeks into the presidency before you've learned where the bathrooms are in the White House. It was just kind of absurd. So here we are again with a bad economy, having drifted down into the kind of vicious polarization which has become a staple of American life for one major reason above all others. The parties are no longer diversified. In the old days, when you had liberal Republicans from the Northeast and Midwest to combine with liberal Democrats from the North and the Midwest and the West, you would have bipartisan support for something like health care or Medicare or Social Security. And on the other side, when you had conservative Southern Democrats from the South and the border states and a few conservatives from the Western states, they could join together with the conservative Republicans, mainly from the South, the Rocky Mountain states, and some of the Midwestern farm states, to support Reagan's tax and economic program in 1981. When you have changes that are bipartisan and produced with sizable majorities in both houses of Congress, they'll last. They'll last. They're not repealed later on. Maybe that's a good thing, maybe it's a bad thing, but they last. Well, when you have a major change in policy that will pass by 1 or 2 votes, wholly supported by one party, it's almost inevitable that that policy change will be repealed the next time the other party is in power. And of course it will happen because we have this two-party system. And we'll go back and forth as we always do. So we're now there. We have two parties that are almost completely polarized, no conservatives to speak of in the Democratic Party, some moderates, some blue dog moderates. They're not Old South conservatives. And in the Republican Party, literally you have Olympia Snowe and half the time Susan Collins. And maybe half the time Mike Castle from Delaware and a couple of others, but that's it. That's it. The Republican Party is comprehensively conservative. The Democratic Party is comprehensively liberal. They don't speak the same language. They don't have the same values. They don't agree on just about anything. And of course, the people who run for office are people who believe even more strongly in the party foundation and the party philosophy. So they're even less willing to compromise than a random sample of you. If we were to put together a random sample of you, we might come up with 3 or 4 things we could do on health care, or 3 or 4 things we could do for national defense or terrorism, whatever the case may be. We'd sit around a table, we'd learn about it, we might be able to compromise because that's the way most of us are. Most of us are center or center right or center left. We're gathered around the center. Not the people who are in Congress and major elective office, and not the party bases, the people who turn up at primaries and conventions and turn off the lights at 3 a.m. They're well to the right or well to the left. And they're just not given to compromise. So we have this polarization that is preventing progress in lots of different directions, whether it's left or right or middle or, cutting the size of government or expanding it in some areas, whatever your preference is. It's making it very difficult to get much of anything done. So we have a bad economy, high unemployment, the per capita income has either been declining or holding steady, which makes it very difficult for people to see progress in their own lives and their own family lives. This debt bomb, which is coming by the end of the decade, it's already here. Both parties have contributed to it, as I like to say. George W. Bush and a Republican Congress doubled the national debt, and Barack Obama and a Democratic Congress are on track to double it again. So even though they don't agree on anything, they seem to be doing a good job of accomplishing the same bad thing over time. And it's fun to attack Wall Street and the banks, and who likes them, really? I'm sure there are some bankers here. I know you like them. But by and large, let's keep the big boys honest. We enjoy going after big institutions we can't control, whether it's big government or the big banks or the big shots on Wall Street, because that's an easy answer for all our problems. The big boys are causing us problems, and they're ruining our lives, and they're out to get the little people. But it really doesn't, and that may be true to a certain degree, but it doesn't solve any of these problems. It's just a way of blaming people. Just a way of blaming people, and that's where we are. So, as we look forward to the future, let me make a few observations about what's coming up in the midterm elections of 2010, and we'll go even further with even more daring predictions for 2012, because you'll never remember them, and so many years away. I think I could be daring on that, and even further than that to 2050. And I think some of these, I'm serious. No, you're laughing. I'm absolutely serious about that, because the demographics are set. That's where the predictions come from for the long run, the demographics. Now, this November, it's already obvious what's going to happen. Anybody in this room who thinks Democrats are going to do well, I want you to come up and bet me. Whatever you got on you, whatever you got in your bank account, I want to take it. I mean, just to be blunt about it. So, come up afterwards. It's just really a question of whether Republicans do well, or very well, or extremely well. Those are the three. Yeah, those are the three choices. That's it. And this is the midterm election. The midterm election of a Democratic president almost always moves in the direction of the opposition party. There have only been several exceptions. Roosevelt in '34, because of the strong support for the New Deal, he was able to increase Democratic majorities then. 1998, in the sixth-year election for Jimmy Carter, for Bill Clinton, because Freudian, for Bill Clinton, because of the reaction to impeachment, the backlash to impeachment. Republicans could have censured Clinton and been done with it, but they went too far, and the American public didn't like it and punished the Republicans in the 1998 election. And then 2002, because of 9/11, for what I've already reviewed with you. Those are the only three exceptions, and we're not going to get a fourth one this fall, I can tell you. There's absolutely no way. Now, it is impossible in February to say whether it's very well, extremely well, or whatever the third one was. It's just impossible to tell you precisely, because the economy could surprise everybody. Maybe it will get a head of steam. I don't think you're going to see unemployment drop below 9%, but you could have per capita income increasing decently, even without much of a drop in unemployment. That could give Democrats a better chance of cutting their losses, and that's what we're talking about. Or the economy could stay really flat, at which point Republicans will do very well. And then you could have other things happening in the field of terrorism or scandal or the other big issues that matter in national elections. A lot of things could happen, but as a midterm election, this is going to be a Republican election. In the Senate, of course, with Scott Brown being elected in Massachusetts, and that is pretty remarkable. There's just no question about that. After Virginia's not remarkable. Virginia goes back and forth with abandon, and usually it's on an 8 or 12-year cycle, and we're right on schedule. And New Jersey every now and then turns to a Republican when they're really unhappy with the Democratic governor, which they were with John Corzine. And they found the system in New Jersey to be corrupt, which it is permanently, no matter who's in charge. The New Jerseyans wake up to this at regular intervals, that they have a thoroughly corrupt state and system, and they take revenge on the ends. And then, of course, Scott Brown in Massachusetts. And literally, I knew no one in the political system, no one in either party who thought Scott Brown was going to win until a week ahead of the election. I mean, this all happened at the end. All happened at the end. And if there's anybody in here who's going to tell me that they thought Ted Kennedy's Senate seat in Massachusetts was going to go Republican sometime in 2009, well, I'm not going to tell you what I think of that prediction or whether I think you're being honest about it. People just did not see that coming until the very end. And the combination of those three, when you look at what's happening with the independents going about 2-1 to the Republicans, they're having voted for Obama, depending on the state, either narrowly or substantially in 2008, tells you what's happening in a midterm election. And you also have a much lower turnout driven by the bases. Presidential election has a 60 to 62% turnout of the eligible voters, those age 18 and over. A midterm congressional election, you go from 60 to 62 all the way down to about 38 to 40. You drop 20 to 24 points. Well, who are the people who don't show up? They tend to be centrist voters. They tend to be people who aren't as involved in politics disproportionately. They're young. The young are now 2-1 Democratic. They tend to be minority voters who are 90-10 Democratic. So you can see what's going to happen in November, partly because of the turnout in a midterm election. So in the Senate, with Democrats now at 59, which used to be a pretty healthy total, but 59 votes can no longer run the Senate. You have to have at least 60 reliable votes, which, since they're politicians, means 65 to 70 senators in order to get 60 votes. My guess is Republicans are going to pick up a minimum of 5, could be as many as 8. And this is, we're right here in February, and so there's a margin of error there. I don't think the margin's going to go in the Democratic direction. I'll be shocked if Republicans don't get the 4 or 5 minimum seats, which will bring Democrats down to 54, 55 seats in the Senate. It could go further in a Republican direction in the Senate. And we can talk about any of the individual races you want to during the question period. That's what I do all day, is follow these 37 Senate elections and 38 governor's elections and 435 House elections. And I'm a very sick person. This is what I do all day long. In the House of Representatives, the big question now, and no one was asking this question a month ago, can the Republicans take over the House? Well, they can. It's possible. Remember, they have to gain 40 seats to do it. Right now, I have them at plus 27. So they're 13 away from picking up the House. Well, that's doable by November, but it's tough. You know, the easy seats, the gravy, are those plus 27. So the odds are Democrats will retain control of the House, at least nominally. Whether they can actually run the House, if they have a majority of 12 or 13, is another question entirely. And of course, running the Senate, as I suggested, is impossible. If you have 53, 54, 55 senators, get some things through, but not anything that's terribly controversial. And the governorship elections are always fascinating. And we've got all the big states are up this year because the big states have moved to the off year. They don't want to have presidential coattail influencing who they pick for governor. So we've had this transfer from the presidential year elections for governors to now off years. So, Florida is up, and Texas is up, and California is up. California, it's incredible, isn't it? Jerry Brown, Governor Moonbeam, those of us who are older remember him from the 70s, and Governor Moonbeam, who was the youngest governor of California, could very easily now be the oldest governor of California. He's leading in the polls, but there is a strong Republican, a Republican woman, Meg Whitman. The strength is mainly in the pocketbook there. She's worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and there's no way to limit the spending in California as there is in most places. So one never knows. And after Arnold, I thought the state would certainly go back to Democrats, but Brown has his weaknesses, and he's in his mid-70s. I don't know if he matches the anti-establishment mood out there, but we'll see. California is a plus 20 Democratic state, kind of like Massachusetts. So we'll see what happens there. But there are just loads of states. I'll tell you what's going to surprise you. On election night, you're going to see states that are really deeply blue and are going to vote Democratic, going to vote for Obama again in 2012. But they're going to vote for a Republican governor as a balance. Americans have kind of worked in another check and balance into the constitutional system through our votes. Pennsylvania is going to go Republican. They're kind of, every state has its little rules, little electoral rules. You know about Virginia's because you live here that at least since 1977, we always vote for the gubernatorial candidate of the party opposite to the sitting president. Who knows why? I guess it makes some sense. Maybe part of it's happenstance, but part of it, I think, is a genuine reaction to the ends, and we like to balance power. We like to give some power to both sides because we don't really trust either one of them completely. Well, in Pennsylvania, they have another rule. It's 8 years and out. They've also had a lot of corruption in Pennsylvania, not like the champions, New Jersey, or as I like to say it, my unholy trinity of corruption, Illinois, New Jersey, and Louisiana. You can't beat them. If you want to study corruption, you just spend all your time in those three states. But Pennsylvania's had a fair amount of corruption, and they don't trust either party. And so it's 8 years in for this party, and then 8 years in for the other party. And this has gone on for decades and decades. So the Republicans, I think, will win easily in Pennsylvania. I think they're going to pick up Michigan, probably Wisconsin. They're going to beat an incumbent Democrat in Iowa, and on and on. You're going to have a lot of states that are Democratic voting Republican in this midterm year. So, and that matters for redistricting, which is coming up in 2011. We'll have it in this state. How many of you, just for my information, are in favor of some form of nonpartisan redistricting, if such a thing could be devised? There you are. Well, we're together on this. And I'm delighted to tell you it is finally scheduled to happen. It is on the 12th of never. Okay, that's when it's going to happen. They've killed it for this year. I've tried to sell people on the only way this can. Dan, you got to help me on this. Okay, here's how it can happen. And this is sad. I'm trying to get them as a fallback, not just in this state but elsewhere, to have the legislatures pass it effective in 2021 after the next census. Here's why. A substantial majority of the legislators in the 50 states serve less than 10 years. So they won't even be in the legislatures. They imagine themselves in Congress or maybe in Bermuda in retirement by then. So it won't affect them, and they'll get credit for being reformers. They'll be hailed as conquering heroes by we citizens and the newspapers and all the rest of it. That's the only hope, 2021. So when you talk to your legislators, try to sell them on it, because there's just no chance we're going to get it in a year that's relevant to the legislators. It will actually make a difference in the short term. But we've got some great redistricting coming up in 2011, and it's going to have an impact. All of the 7,400 state legislative seats are redistricted according to the new population figures, and the 435 U.S. House seats, and it's all done by the state legislatures. And once again, you're having a tremendous transfer of seats from the North and the Midwest to the South and the West. Only Louisiana is losing a seat in the South because of Hurricane Katrina, essentially. It's a long-term development there. Now, there are some interesting wrinkles to this. We're used to California growing by leaps and bounds. And in fact, since it became a state in the 1840s, it has always gained multiple seats in every single redistricting, reapportionment, multiple additional House seats. For the first time ever, it's either going to gain 0 or it's going to lose a seat. It's either 0 or -1, because the Golden State is finished. I mean, the Golden State dream is over, and people are actually immigrating to Nevada and Colorado and New Mexico and Arizona. And by the way, that's one major reason why those states are turning more Democratic, in addition to the growing Hispanic population. So look for that. That will be a surprise. But by and large, it's a transfer from the north to the south. That means additional electoral votes for Republicans. I think they'll get an additional net 7 or 8 electoral votes effective for 2012. So that will be, if the election is close in 2012, who knows? Those 7 or 8 electoral votes could make a difference. Now, that's not to say that President Obama will lose in 2012, and I'm really not going to get very specific on that one because it's just too far away. If the economy does bounce back by 2012, even if we're down to, say, 7.5%, or 8.3% unemployment, that's not good, but it's a heck of a lot better than 10.2%, which was the peak. People have to feel better. I was at a conference recently with some very prominent economists, and of course, they were all over the lot. They were prominent economists, so they were all over the lot. All disagreed with one another, except on one thing. I looked at their long-term charts. They kind of smooth out. The graph smooth out for the long term. And I asked them, if you look at modern American history, which president would this most resemble, this long-term graph of where the economy's going? And all 3 of them said Reagan. Because you may not remember this, but President Reagan was very unpopular in the last quarter of 1981 and throughout 1982. And the Democrats did extremely well in the midterm elections of 1982. And then by 1983, David Broder was writing columns about how Reagan was a failed president and was a guaranteed one-termer. And then Reagan got 58% and won 49 out of 50 states. Well, what's good for the goose can be good for the gander. If the economy recovers on that track, and I have no idea, but if it does, the way these economists thought it might, then you have a recovery in a presidential popularity, the end of 2011 through 2012, and you get a re-election. Now, if it doesn't recover and the economy is still flat and people are unhappy and nothing's getting done with today, then you'll have a Republican victory if they nominate a reasonable candidate. So that eliminates a fair number. Sarah Palin. Now, those of you who are Palinites, feel free. It's a free country. And if you want to get Goldwater's 38%, again, go for it. Go for it. That's a Goldwater 38%, guaranteed. And Democrats are rooting for you, believe me. They're rooting for Sarah to get that nomination. Now, I'm going to conclude with this and then take some questions. There are short-term forces in politics, like the ones I've been talking about, the economy and scandal and war and peace and terrorism and that kind of thing. And those short-term forces can produce any given election result in a given year. But the election result can be deviational. It can deviate from the long-term trend. What are the long-term trends in American politics? Let me just review a few of them with you, and it tells you something about what both parties need to be doing. Let's take racial minorities as a percentage of the electorate. In the 2008 election, racial minorities, and I'm counting African Americans, Hispanic Americans, Asian Americans, Muslim Americans, et cetera, all together, 26%. 26% of the electorate. And on average, because remember, Hispanics are about 2-to-1 Democratic, African Americans 90-10, Asian Americans about 60-40, now sometimes it's 65-35, something like that. It differs, minority group to minority group. But on the whole, minorities vote 75% Democratic. And you say, well, 75% of 26%, if the Republicans do well with white voters, they can win. That's true. It's absolutely true. Except by 2050, when you add up the minority voters, it hits 50%. Now, if Democrats are getting 75% of half of the electorate, how often do you think Republicans are going to win national elections? Because the ceiling for Republicans among white voters is about 58%. In other words, you have enough Democrats among whites because it's their natural party ID or because they're they're young voters or for whatever reason they have identified with the Democratic Party. That's 42% or more of whites voting for the Democratic candidate. Well, there you go. There you go. And what's the message there? The message there is that if Republicans don't start recruiting minorities, and I don't mean a token here or there, they can forget it. And that's their challenge. And you don't get Hispanics by championing anti-immigration legislation. You don't. You may want it, some of you out there may want it, but you don't win that way, and you don't attract Hispanics that way. Just for an example, in African Americans, the history there is so thick and rich and poisonous that it's going to take a long, long time for Republicans to break through. Asian Americans, it's somewhat different. All right, that's one example. Young people, in our field, we notice that every now and then, there is a kind of realignment with the younger generation. Roosevelt had one in the early 30s. Young people strongly attached themselves to the Democratic Party because of the New Deal. Reagan had one in the early 80s. Young people really liked him. Maybe it was the grandfatherly image plus the policies that they liked, strong on national defense and economics and so on. And those young people have maintained to this day a more Republican, a disproportionately Republican voting pattern in November. Well, in 2008, it happened for the Democrats with Obama in a big way, a massive way. The kind of rarity that we see in historical terms, with 66% of those 18 to 29 voting Democratic, 34% Republican. And this is with a Republican, John McCain, who wasn't exactly a Neanderthal or a troglodyte. There's no reason why young people shouldn't have been attracted in a larger percentage to John McCain. But that's what happened. It didn't work for him. So again, you saw with the CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Committee, they put a lot of emphasis on attracting young people Friday and yesterday to attend. And they got a lot of work to do. They did get a lot of young people to attend. Some of my students from UVA went up there. Some were turned on, some were turned off by the kind of literature that was distributed. But you always have extremists on both sides who unfortunately come to these gatherings. Women aren't going to change their proportion of the population. Young people, by the way, are going to increase their proportion a bit. Minorities by a giant percentage. Women are going to stay 53%. It's in the human genome. We're wired that way. Women are 53%, men 47%. So the percentage is the same, but we've now reached a kind of stability on the gender gap, which has persisted since 1980. There was a little bit of it in 1964 in Johnson-Goldwater, but really since 1980, we've had this gender gap. And the gender gap, of course, is the propensity of women to vote disproportionately Democratic and the propensity of men to vote disproportionately Republican. But of course, who would you rather have on your side? A large portion of the 53% or a large portion of the 47%? Well, if they're the same percentages, you want to go with the women. Well, women are now voting on average, not just in presidential races, but in state races and even local races, about 56% Democratic. Again, it's easy for Democrats. If these trends continue, inertia carries them along, except when the short-term forces move people toward Republicans in a particular election. So Republicans have got a lot of work to do there. Similarly, with graduate-educated population, it used to be that those with any graduate education as a whole, graduate education, were heavily Republican. Why? It was income-based. It was economically based. Because of tax and spend policies, whatever. Republicans were more inclined to let those people making lots of money keep more of that money. So they were disproportionately Republican in their voting habits. What's changed? Well, what's changed is, first of all, the proportion of graduate-educated population has grown by leaps and bounds. It's up to 17% of the electorate today. By 2050, it will be 26%. More than a quarter of all American voters will have had some graduate education. And we've gotten to the point, amazingly, where 58% of those with any graduate education, regardless of race, regardless of gender, 58% vote Democratic, 42% vote Republican. Why? The social issues. The social issues have started to trump the fiscal issues with people of larger incomes, the people who live in the older suburbs and the newer exurbs. They're not interested in social conservative policy on abortion and gay rights and immigration and all these other social issues. They're turned off by the conservative Christian perspective on these issues. I don't know what the Republicans can do because they've got a base in many states which is half or more social conservative. So if they abandon conservative social positions, they're going to lose their base. And yet, if they don't abandon or water down those social positions, they can't attract the graduate educated population voting more Democratic. So good luck on that one. Republicans since Nixon have relied heavily on the white working class. And that was fine as long as the white working class was close to 60% of the electorate, which it was in the 70s. And even up to 1988, it was still 54% of the overall population. Well, in 2008, white working class comprised only 39% of the people who turned out to vote. By 2050, the white working class will be 31% of the voting population. So again, it's if you're a Republican out there, you got a lot of work to do to broaden your party. If you're a Democrat, obviously you want to not just root for these changes, you want to do what you can to solidify the party's support with the groups that are providing additional support to Democrats on Election Day. Because, frankly, we don't want to end up with a party and a half system. It's bad enough that it's a two-party system. Maybe we could use a 2.5-party system some of the time. Some people say 3-party system. I say 2.5 parties. But to go down to 1.5 parties where one party wins, 2/3 of the elections, and the other party only wins when we're rejecting, because of short-term forces, the majority party, is not necessarily healthy. The more secure any party is in power, the more likely it is to be corrupt. And both parties, as I've learned, are very capable of corruption. Well, we can talk about 2012 if you want. There are loads of candidates we can talk about. I'll save that for the question period. As I frequently say, Dan, as you well know, we have not only politics is a good thing, but we have our crystal ball website connected to the Center for Politics. And he who lives by the crystal ball ends up eating ground glass. And on that note of humility, I will stop and I want to use the rest of our time here. We've got a good, I think, 20 minutes for questions, which will be more fun. Thank you very much. Yes, ma'am. Now, give your name and anything you want to tell about yourself so that everybody can hear.
My name's Kathleen Petty. Kathleen O'Keefe. I have a microphone.
Oh, you have a mic?
Right, should be right under here.
Here it is.
All right.
Here it is. There you go. That will help.
My name's Kathleen O'Keefe Petty, and this refers to your talking about the varying demographics and how the youth are growing. Did you mention the aging voter, the graying of the electorate, and what effect does that have?
Well, the older voters, of course, who are, I hate to admit this, baby boomers, we never thought we would get older, and it's terribly wrong that we are. It depends on which portion of the baby boomers. You had the early part of the baby boom generation, 46 to 64, 65, were heavily Democratic, those born in that age group. Then the baby boomers started turning more conservative and Republican, in part, again, because of the political figures defining their times as they came of age. I think it's so important which figures are dominant. as young people begin to recognize the world around them and they start to read the headlines and they start to watch the news, who are they seeing? What impression are these leaders leaving with them, positive or negative? And then that tends to convert them to one side or the other. Not that a good number of them aren't independent and can't sway one way or the other, but as people age, they do tend to fall more prominently overall into a party category. They don't become more independent, they become somewhat less independent. Remember, it's different. It's how people vote is different than how they describe how they vote. For example, the Gallup poll consistently and inaccurately lists the percentage of independents in the population is somewhere between, depending on the poll, 34 and 38%. Well over a third of Americans are independents, except that they aren't. Hardcore independents in America, depending on the era, are between 11 and 15%. The rest of Americans, over 80%, actually have a partisan identification. It may be a weak one, it may be a strong one. I've interviewed voters myself. I love this. I say, are you a Democrat, or Republican, or Independent? You have your list of questions and you go down them. Are you a Democrat, or Republican, or Independent? I'm an independent. Don't fence me in. I don't like those party bosses. Okay, well, let's go through the elections. And if it's a research project, people will tell you anything. It's kind of frightening. So you go through the years and you say, all right, in this presidential election, how did you vote? I voted for this candidate. In this presidential election, this gubernatorial election, all the way through. This independent voted for 18 of the last 19 Republican candidates. No, you see, operationally, he or she is a Republican. He or she is not an independent. He or she likes to call himself or herself an independent because there's status to it, right? There's a certain status to being an independent, but they're not really independents. So I just make that point. Next time you see that Gallup poll, have a good laugh on me, will you? Because it's a joke. Yes, ma'am.
I represent the League of Women Voters in the state legislature here in Virginia, and one of the League's longtime issues has been the role of money in politics. Your analysis has been wonderful demographically. We've all been riveted. But I'd like to hear, if you're willing, a word about the role of money in politics, and if you have any predictions about the brand new Supreme Court ruling.
Sure.
That corporations may speak as individuals, and the limit on their money, not only to Congress to buy into to influence voting patterns in Congress, but also in elections to influence the outcome. Do you have any predictions about what this Roberts Court decision may do to our politics?
Certainly. First, on the role of money in politics, I've written 3 books about money in politics, and there's one thing I've learned. They bore people. I can tell that from the sales figures. I could not get my own family to read it. Okay? We had nightly readings, but they fell asleep. So that may be part of the problem, but people's eyes glaze over, when you give too much information about that. So I'll try and be brief. Jesse Unruh said it years ago, former California treasurer, who was Ronald Reagan's second opponent for governor of California back in 1970. Money is the mother's milk of politics. And Mama's been producing a lot more milk as the years have rolled on. The amounts are just staggering. When I first got involved in politics in the 60s, take Virginia, for example. Do you know members of the legislature would run for a few $100s? Almost never did you even have $1,000 being spent in a legislative election. And yes, I know we have to account for inflation over all those years, but even accounting for it, maybe that brings it up to 30,000, something like that. That's probably an exaggeration. Today, a competitive race for the House of Delegates will be $250,000 to $500,000 per candidate. The House of Delegates, they're paid, what, $17,600 a year? I mean, this is just ridiculous. But on the other hand, it's a First Amendment right. This is included under the First Amendment. It is a free speech area, and that's certainly how the Supreme Court has interpreted it. And you can't limit speech. You can't limit political speech. It's at the pinnacle of protected speech under court rulings, a whole series of court rulings. So whether we like it or not, we're stuck with it. The best we can do is full and instantaneous disclosure. Every state needs what Virginia has, which is a VPAP. I know you're familiar with the Virginia Public Access Project. This is the only group I've ever known supported by everybody from far right to far left, and people contribute to it because all it does is take the campaign finance reports and boil it down and present it so that the press and people can read it and understand where the money is coming from and to whom it's going and get some sense of why. All right? It's a great thing. Please go to their website, vpap.org, I think it is, isn't it? Now, as far as Citizens United, honestly, I don't know. I've read so many things on it. I'm one of those who believes that the effect will be less than predicted. And my reason is that I'm nearly 58, and almost always the effect is less than predicted of everything. And so I tend to think, I've already talked to enough captains of industry, and they've said to me, do you seriously think that we are going to upset our shareholders? Or we're going to even upset the people at the top of the echelon in our company and give large sums of money to just one side. It's too much trouble. What happens if the people we pick lose? Then we're targets for the entire next term of those who won, if they're vengeful, which describes 80% of those elected, understandably so. I'll bet you there's less impact than we think, but there will be some impact. For example, the oil and gas industry has never been hesitant about making enemies. They have no problem with it, and they're going to spend a lot of money independently using Citizens United as their justification, and they will target a certain number of members of the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate as a consequence. So the truth is we have to wait and see what happens this year to evaluate it. I'm less concerned than most people are. There's an outstanding elections attorney, Ken Gross. Google him, Ken Gross, Citizens United. He's written several analyses of this which suggest that it's going to have less impact than people think. My guess. Let's get a young person over here as we talk about young people. I'll get you, sir. Don't worry. I'm glad you're excited. But we want to get these young people. Probably Dan Palazzolo made him attend. That's my guess. I'm impressed.
He actually didn't, but I did.
He didn't? Okay, there you go.
I'm a junior here at UR and
Fantastic.
a political science major.
Good for you.
So my question is this. In this current climate, there's so much angst against the polarization. You're talking about there are no more liberal Republicans, conservative Democrats. What do you think are the chances of people coming together and making actual third party of centrist? You see the Tea Partiers being very libertarian. Do you think there's a chance that all these people who actually can agree on a lot of issues come together and put a formal challenge to the liberals and the conservatives?
Well, that's an excellent question and very well put. And the fact that you would come to a talk about politics on a Sunday afternoon when you could be having a good time says a lot for you. And I salute you for that. This is probably one of our future legislators and so on. And we look forward to that. To be honest, centrists always talk about doing this, and they never do it. The centrists generally end up like Evan Bayh, getting discouraged and distressed and quitting. Now, I understand why he did. I happen to know Evan Bayh. I was already on the faculty when he was in the law school at UVA in the early 80s, and I got to know him at that time. And he's always been right in the middle and therefore has had rocky relations with some people in his own party and good relations with some Republicans, but not others. The centrists tend to get discouraged because increasingly they see how polarized the system is. Are they willing to organize a third party? I suppose the closest the centrists ever came to organizing a third party was with either John Anderson in 1980 or even Ross Perot in 1982. It is extremely difficult to do because the ballot access laws that have been written in the 50 states have been written by Democrats and Republicans. And you see, Democrats and Republicans don't agree on many things, but they agree on one thing above all, that the pie, if it's divided into two, will give them a larger piece than if the pie is divided into 3 or 4 or 5. So the campaign finance laws, the ballot access laws, frankly, media coverage, media and analysts like me, we tend to be cynical because we've been through it all before so many times, and we say, oh, here we go again. They won't be significant. So there's an edge to the coverage, and there isn't that much of it unless the third party demands it. Now, Perot, I'm going to balance what I said. People forget that in June of 1992, in the Gallup poll, Perot was at 40%, exactly at 40. President George H.W. Bush, the incumbent president, was at 28%. Bill Clinton, the eventual winner, was at 26%. If Ross Perot had been sane, he would have been president. See? So we heard the nuts and bolts rolling around in there, just in time. The daughter's wedding, and remember all that stuff. And the one I loved was the North Vietnamese in their black pajamas crawling up his estate in Texas trying to assassinate him. And he was saved by the FBI. The FBI had never heard of it. There was no such thing had ever happened. But he was nuts. But he did a good issue, the national debt. Someday we may get a centrist who is sane and is in that position to potentially win. Colin Powell could have been that person had he run as an independent, say, in 1996. I think he would have beaten Clinton for re-election and beaten Bob Dole, the Republican candidate. So it might happen, but it is so tough to do. It's so tough to do. I promise this gentleman here, and I saw another young person back there too. We're going to get to him as well.
Thank you. My name is Bob Rich.
Yes, sir.
My question is, assuming that Senator Kennedy had not become ill, could he have effected a different outcome, such as you say that Lyndon Johnson could have let us get together and reason together? Could he have done that, do you think?
Yes, I do believe he would have, because that was his passion. And of course, he was absent for almost all of the 2009 session. He made a few appearances, and he tried to keep up, as sick as he was, and he tried to make calls, but it's just impossible. You have to be there in the thick of it, and your staff can't do it for you. His personality could have brought the Democrats together for a combination of reasons. He has always been close to Max Baucus, for example. I think Baucus could have been moved along by Kennedy. So the answer is yes, and that's why I say books will be written about this, because there are probably 20 different turning points that all moved against health care reform and Obama's plan, and you needed maybe 18 of the 20 to kill it. And it happened. It happened. And that's why in politics, you never waste time if you want to get something done. You never waste time. And they fumbled it away. They wasted a lot of time. Now let me get that young person back there. Is this another one of your students, Dan? Get some extra credit if it is.
Hi, my name is Dan. I'm from New York. I wanted to know what you think of the possibility of Evan Bayh replacing Joe Biden in 2012. And also, do you place any significance in Ron Paul winning the straw vote at CPAC?
Okay, good. Two good questions. As far as Evan Bayh replacing Joe Biden, it's somewhere between 0 and -1, because the Obama administration is furious that he stepped out, and that may be a seat now that goes to the Republicans. It's not a certainty. That the Democrats have now lined up their strongest possible candidate, Congressman Brad Ellsworth, a sheriff who has a very law and order image and a conservative image in Indiana that has sold. In fact, he ousted a Republican incumbent with 61% of the vote. It's just unheard of to beat an incumbent and to have the challenger get 61%. So I actually think Ellsworth has a shot, especially if the Republicans give the nomination to Dan Coates, who, as we've learned, lives in our state. Maybe he'd be our third senator if elected, and he wanted to retire in North Carolina. These are two bad things if you want to be reelected in Indiana, and he's a lobbyist, and he worked for Yemen, and there's just various things that I don't think would be all that helpful. Having said that, it's a Republican year. Despite Obama winning extremely narrowly in Indiana in 2008, it is still a Republican state, and the Republican nominee is going to be at least nominally favored even over Ellsworth. Ellsworth might pull an upset. The Republicans would be better off going with another candidate rather than Dan Coats, but they may have to go with Coats. So believe me, if Bai runs for anything in 2012, he will run for governor again. He enjoyed being governor for 8 years. He was governor at 32, was the youngest governor in the U.S. at that point, and was governor for 8 full years before running for the Senate and serving now 12 years there. They're all like that. You know, talk to Mark Warner. All the former governors in the Senate just hate the Senate, you know, because it takes them 20 days to burp. You know, they can't get anything done. They're used to saying, do this, do that, do the other thing, you know, and some things will actually get done when they're governor. So I don't see Bai running in 2012. Now, it is not impossible that after a time away from politics, he will decide to come back. If he runs for governor and wins as an executive, he may want to run for president in 2016. When Obama would be leaving if he gets elected to a second term, and even if he didn't, he can't really run against Obama. And I somehow also don't think Joe Biden would step aside with just a few words, if you know what I mean. All right, now as far as Ron Paul, look, it's a joke. This straw polls are worthless. Regular polls are nearly worthless. Straw polls are totally worthless. Keep in mind that about 10,000 people attended the CPAC conference. There were, depending on the press reports, 2 different reports, and I haven't been able to figure out which one's right. Either 2,400 votes were cast or 2,900 votes were cast, which raises questions immediately. But essentially, you've got Ron Paul getting 31% of the vote when less than a third of the vote, when less than a third of the people at the conference voted. So we got a third of the third. To me, that's not very impressive. His people organized. The other candidates decided not to spend any money. Why? Because this conference has a perfect record of nominating losers. Mitt Romney won it 3 times in a row. His name is not President Romney. So there you go. Now, we got another young person here. They're trying to get your attention, Dan. Okay, this is great.
Hi, I'm Jeff. I'm a senior here at Richmond.
Wonderful.
This is more of a
Congratulations.
policy question. If President Obama is able to salvage any of the components of the health care package, what do you think that'll look like, and with what timetable?
Well, look, what they're talking about is what Rahm Emanuel was talking about in the very beginning. Emanuel's gotten a lot of criticism. In fact, he did not want Obama to go for a big health care package. He wanted him to go for certain narrow reforms that would broaden coverage by a few million, creating enough new revenue for the insurance companies to cover, for example, portability and eliminating insurance companies canceling your insurance because they discover a pre-existing condition, okay? And remember, you have to broaden the insurance pool of people in order to pay for these insurance reforms. Otherwise, you're just going to jack up the premiums for everybody else. They're going to get mad at you. So the two have to go hand in hand. The two changes have to go hand in hand. If they can come up with a narrow compromise that doesn't involve reconciliation, in my view, it will be that. Expanding by a few million instead of 14 million or 16 million, whichever version you believe, doing a lot, you'll do relatively little, but it will be popular. I've never met anybody who believed that insurance companies should be able to cancel your insurance because they discover a pre-existing condition. Maybe there's somebody here who believes that, but I think you're in a small minority. The vast majority kind of don't like that because it defeats the whole purpose of insurance. So they could do things like that, but you see their appetites got too big. And I have seen this, all of us of a certain age have seen this. I don't care whether the president's a Democrat or Republican. They overinterpret their election. They overinterpret their mandate. They refuse to believe the truth. The truth is we generally reject the other candidate or the incumbent party. It's retrospective. We're not saying they're the greatest thing since cream cheese and sliced bread. We're saying the other side had stale bread. See, and they don't get it. And so they think, the people love me. They have just endorsed my 47-point platform. No, they don't even know what your platform was. They may know 2 points out of the 47. And that's what happened. You see the egos, and it's a tragedy, really. They could have done a narrow-based reform and made some real progress. And maybe they still will. I think they're going to suffer tremendously with this reconciliation process if they push that, because it's going to be seen as ramming it down the throats of people who've already rejected it. And you look at those national polls, they're all just overwhelmingly against the health care reform package. And in addition to that, you've got the electoral results in 2 states last November, and particularly Scott Brown in Massachusetts. It looks bad. Even if that wasn't really the focus of people's votes, it looks bad. Yes, ma'am. I don't know who you want. Why don't I let you pick instead of me picking, because I don't know where you are. Now, this lady is going to be very hurt if she's not selected.
I was just rather interested in all of this. Sarah Palin has not been introduced in any subject.
Yes, I have mentioned her
You
occasionally.
mentioned her, but it kind of slid over it.
I did slid over it. I've tried to avoid controversy wherever possible. She has a tendency to attack people who attack her, so I've tried to be nice. But it's getting late, and so I'm going to turn mean as we finish up the session here, just to end with a bang. I would put it this way. If Sarah Palin is nominated by the Republicans in 2012, the Republican Party platform is going to be the longest suicide note ever written. Or, given what she did with her hand, it may be the shortest suicide note ever written. But look, she's an interesting person. She's fun to listen to. She has a heck of a story. What a soap opera. We love soap operas. We like our political people to provide soap operas. That's one source of the Kennedys' support over the years. What a soap opera. But having said that, she blew it when she resigned as governor. It was the only substantial executive office she'd ever been elected to, and she cut out after less than 2.5 years. It made no sense whatsoever. She's compared constantly to Reagan. How do you compare somebody who serves 2.5 years as governor of Alaska with a tiny population? No, I know that you can see Russia from there, but there is no comparability to serving as a 2-term governor of a nation state of California. Reagan was perfectly experienced for the White House, whether you agreed or disagreed with his policies. He had the experience to govern. She doesn't. Think about what would happen. Also, she quit the governorship. Why wouldn't she quit the presidency? When she got that was a problem with Ross Perot. You could imagine at any moment his walking out, leaving us with the guy who didn't know where he was and what he was doing. Remember, who was running with him for vice president. Yes, ma'am. You tell me when we're going to quit. I don't want to hold them up. It's a Sarah Palin question? Okay.
Thank you. My name is Lovey Jane Long, and I am a political science graduate of the University of Richmond under Dr. Spencer Albright,
Yes.
who was a hero to many of us. Why do you think McCain picked Palin?
Because McCain loves to roll the dice. And a lot of his life has been, he succeeded on a wing and a prayer, literally, if you trace his life. He is not the kind of politician, whether you like this or dislike it, who will sit there and study a problem to death before he decides to take a stand. He goes on gut instinct. And he looked at a whole series of Republican candidates, and I got to tell you, there wasn't a lot to choose from, at least in terms of helping him get elected. He was already well behind. Now, he wanted to pick Lieberman, and they tried it out with the Republican constituency groups, and the social conservatives said, if you pick Lieberman, who is pro-choice on abortion, we will boycott your election. Automatic landslide defeat for McCain. It was bad enough for him anyway. He couldn't pick the guy he really wanted. in the end, it was between Palin and Governor Pawlenty, Tim Pawlenty of Minnesota. I saw Pawlenty at the Republican convention, and he's got a good sense of humor. He didn't necessarily show it in that speech yesterday, but he's got a good sense of humor. And he took me aside and he whispered into my ear, he says, I was one chromosome away from being vice president. and that's really what did it. She was a woman. McCain wanted to roll the dice. He thought, hey, they've got the first African American. I'm going to elect the first woman vice president. That's really what it was. And he had talked to her in his lifetime, for 2 hours before picking her or having her down to Arizona for that little vetting session that didn't amount to anything. Now, that's called taking a chance. You know, it reminds me of what happened with Nixon and Agnew. That's how Agnew got on the ticket. And you know, the guy who was taking the bribes in the governor's office and then the vice presidential desk until he was caught. You know, if he'd been honest, he would have been president, right? He would have been after Nixon resigned, but turned out he was a crook. Now let me get, I'll answer you after this, but I mean, in terms of after the session, but let me get a couple new people and then we'll let you go and you tell me when you're ready to end. I don't want to hold people overtime. I
don't want to hold you
Where
up
are you?
either. You've
No. I'm happy to do it.
kind.
It's just that when you teach, if you ever teach a minute over, the looks kill from the students. I always say the students are the only interest group in the world that wants less rather than more.
Bob Perillo. I'm a retired enlisted Navy guy. And,
Yes, sir.
Also an electrical engineer. I teach around here too.
Wonderful.
Yeah. I was going to ask the independent question, not so much, but I was going to ask the independent question, and I think that McCain, if he ran as an independent in the Republicans, that he could have won. And I also think that Buffett or Petraeus or even McCain again running as an independent could possibly win in 2012 if the economy tanks again. William Jennings Bryan almost pulled it off, and you didn't mention him. My question is,
William Jennings Bryan. Well, he ran 3 times as a Democrat.
But as an independent, cross of gold.
He was a Democratic nominee 3 times. I know he stayed in my pavilion at UVA. He used to sleep there. He appears to me frequently. If I've had 2 or 3 beers, I've talked to him about it.
But my question is,
okay.
In terms of majorities, most polls show that most of the people want single payer. Polls show that most of the people want a real world war against Islamicists, terrorism. Polls show that most of the people want civil unions over marriage. Polls show that most people want us out of Afghanistan. Yet that's not what happens. And shouldn't politics intervenes? And shouldn't politicians be more responsive to the will of the people?
Well, it's a great question, but the problem is, what is the will of the people? I'm gonna give you a short answer. If you want to come up afterwards, I'll give you a longer answer because I know we've got to conclude. But I always tell people, if you will let me word the questions, draw the sample, do the interviews, and interpret the results, I will get you any answer you want. And to me, that's the sum and substance of polling. So I don't know that I agree with you that the people believe in all of those things. I think you're right. Some polls show the people, quote, believe in some of those things, but I think it was more the wording of the question or perhaps the bias of the group taking the poll. Let me wind up by saying how much I've enjoyed this, how much I've enjoyed being with you. It is a great privilege to be here at this fine university, to be with my friend Dan Palazzolo, and I look forward to, I hope, speaking with all of you again. Thanks.